She was just a poor cleaning lady with a kind heart. But when she shared her lunch with a lonely girl in a wheelchair, she had no idea the child was the billionaire boss's daughter. And what would happen next would change everything. Mabel Hart had been working as a cleaning lady for nearly 15 years. Every morning before the city woke up, she slipped into the towering glass building of Linscott and Reed, a prestigious law firm in downtown Chicago. Her sneakers barely made a sound as she swept through marble floors, disinfected sleek conference rooms, and polished the executive offices. She moved like a ghost, always invisible, always gone before anyone of importance ever arrived. She didn't mind the silence. It gave her time to think, to breathe. At 42, Mabel had lived through more than most. Her husband had walked out when their son was just a toddler, and her son Wyatt had died serving overseas. That loss had carved a hollow place inside her, one she carried around quietly, like a stone in her chest. But she didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Mabel lived in a cramped one-room apartment with peeling paint and creaky floors. Her meals were simple, her clothes secondhand, and her only luxury was the 10 minutes she spent each morning in the park across the street. After finishing her shift, she would sit alone on the same bench near the fountain, unwrapping her breakfast, usually a peanut butter sandwich and a small thermos of cheap coffee. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Her moment of peace before the chaos of the city took hold. One morning, in the pale light before sunrise, Mabel noticed someone sitting by the trees, a young girl in a wheelchair. She was small, thin, maybe 9 or 10 years old, with long chestnut hair and a pale face. The girl wasn't moving, just staring at a group of pigeons on the sidewalk with a blank expression. Mabel watched her from a distance, unsure whether to approach. Something about the child pulled at her. Maybe it was the loneliness in her eyes, or maybe Mabel simply recognized that kind of silence. Still, she said nothing, just sat on her bench and quietly ate, casting glances in the girl's direction. The girl never looked back. That day, Mabel finished her meal and walked away with a heaviness she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, her heart had whispered something unfamiliar. Don't leave her alone tomorrow. The next morning, the sky was dark with storm clouds, and a fine drizzle slicked the pavement as Mabel stepped out of the office building. She clutched her worn gray cardigan around her shoulders and hurried across the street to the park, careful not to slip on the wet bricks. Her thermos was warm in her hand, and in her canvas tote bag was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. 2 slices of ham, a smear of mustard, and a slice of bread she'd toasted extra crispy, just the way Wyatt used to like it. As she neared her usual bench, her eyes darted toward the tree line. The girl was there again, but something was wrong. The wheelchair had sunk slightly into the mud, one wheel crooked, stuck in a soft patch near the base of a tree. Rain soaked the girl's thin jacket, and her long hair clung to her cheeks. She sat still, motionless, her hands gripped tight around the arms of the chair. She looked lost, vulnerable. Mabel didn't hesitate. She crossed the grass quickly, her old sneakers squishing in the wet ground. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" she asked gently, crouching down beside the girl. The girl didn't respond, but flinched slightly, her eyes wide with surprise. Mabel didn't wait for permission. She placed her bag on the ground, gripped the wheelchair firmly, and, with a grunt of effort, pulled it out of the muddy rut. The wheels resisted for a moment, then popped free. Mabel pushed the chair backward until they were back on dry pavement. The girl blinked at her, rain still streaming down her face. "You shouldn't be out here alone in this weather," Mabel said softly, taking off her cardigan and wrapping it around the girl's shoulders. "It's too cold." The girl looked down at the cardigan, then up at Mabel with cautious eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "Here," Mabel said, opening her tote bag and pulling out the sandwich. "It's not much, but it's warm, and you look like you haven't eaten yet." She unwrapped it halfway and held it out. The girl stared at it, uncertain, then slowly reached forward with thin, trembling fingers and took it. She brought the sandwich to her mouth and took a small bite. For a moment, she just chewed silently, then finally, softly, so quietly Mabel almost didn't hear it. She spoke. "Thank you." Mabel's heart squeezed. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she needed to hear something kind again. "You're welcome," Mabel smiled. "My name's Mabel. What's yours?" There was a pause. The girl swallowed another bite, wiped her lips with the sleeve of Mabel's cardigan, and looked up. "Cassidy." "Well, Cassidy," Mabel said gently. "It's nice to meet you." Cassidy gave the smallest of nods and returned her attention to the sandwich, chewing a little faster now. Mabel didn't push the conversation further. She just sat beside her, sipping from her thermos and listening to the rain fall through the trees, knowing in her bones that something quiet and important had just begun. Over the next several mornings, Mabel and Cassidy fell into a gentle rhythm, one that neither of them spoke about, but both clearly cherished. Each day after finishing her cleaning shift at the law firm, Mabel would walk across the street to the park with something extra in her tote bag: a piece of fruit, a muffin she'd baked the night before, sometimes a leftover meatball wrapped in foil from the soup kitchen down the block. Cassidy was always there, waiting in her wheelchair beneath the same tree, even when the wind bit cold or the sky looked threatening. Mabel never asked why, and Cassidy never offered an explanation. Theirs was not a relationship built on questions. It was built on presence, quiet, steady, and increasingly precious. Cassidy began to talk more, little by little. Not about herself, never about her family or where she came from, but about the birds in the park, or how the clouds looked like ocean waves, or how she once read a book where the main character had a fox for a best friend. Her voice was soft and clipped, with a strange formality for someone so young, like she had learned to keep her emotions locked up behind carefully chosen words. Mabel, on the other hand, was all heart. She listened intently, sometimes adding a story of her own, about her son Wyatt, how he used to throw breadcrumbs to the pigeons or dream of becoming a pilot. She didn't cry when she talked about him anymore. There was a rawness in the memories, yes, but speaking his name to Cassidy made it feel like he was still a little bit here. One morning, Mabel brought a small plush lion in a plastic bag. It had faded golden fur and a slightly squished face, its mane a little frayed. "This," she said, holding it out to Cassidy, "belonged to my son when he was little. He called him Amos. He took him everywhere, even to the dentist, poor lion. I thought, maybe you could keep him company now." Cassidy stared at the toy for a long time. Her hands hovered in the air, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to touch something that carried so much meaning. Then slowly she reached forward and took the lion, cradling it in her lap. "Thank you," she whispered, voice shaking. "I've never had a toy that mattered." "You matter," Mabel said without hesitation. "So anything you hold does too." Cassidy turned her face away and wiped at her eyes, pretending the wind had gotten to them. Mabel didn't call her on it. She just leaned back on the bench beside her and stared at the sky, which was finally clearing. It was in that moment that a strange warmth settled over the two of them. A quiet truth neither dared say aloud yet. That somehow, in the middle of a park neither of them belonged to, they had found each other, and that meant they both belonged to something now. It was a Wednesday morning, and the wind carried the bite of early winter. Mabel had just finished mopping the executive floor at Linscott and Reed when she glanced at the clock. She was running late. She quickly peeled off her gloves, grabbed her tote bag from the janitor's closet, and hurried out of the building toward the park. Cassidy hated waiting in the cold, but when she reached their usual spot by the tree, the bench was empty. Mabel froze. She scanned the park, the playground, the walking paths, the fountain, but there was no sign of the wheelchair, no chestnut-haired girl clutching the worn lion named Amos. Her chest tightened. Something felt wrong. Just as she turned to go check the other side of the park, she heard a raised voice echo from across the street, near the lobby of her office building. Curious and increasingly anxious, Mabel followed the sound. There, at the entrance of the building, she saw a commotion. One of the security guards, a young, impatient man named Darnell, was blocking the doorway with his arms crossed. Beside him stood a woman in a nurse's uniform, flustered and clutching a small purse. And in front of her, in the middle of the cold marble floor, was Cassidy in her wheelchair, her face pale and wet with tears. "I'm sorry, miss, but you can't just bring a child in here without clearance," Darnell was saying. "She's not just a child," the woman began. But Mabel didn't let her finish. She rushed forward. "She's with me," Mabel said breathlessly. "She's a friend of mine." Darnell frowned. "You know her?" "I do. Please let them through." The nurse looked at Mabel, surprised but clearly relieved. Cassidy's eyes lit up the moment she saw her, and she wiped her cheeks quickly with her sleeves. Mabel stepped beside her and gently took the handles of the wheelchair. "Let's get you inside where it's warm, honey." Darnell, though skeptical, stepped aside. Mabel pushed Cassidy through the automatic glass doors and toward the elevator. The nurse walked silently beside them. In the elevator, Mabel finally asked, "What happened? Why was she out there alone?" The nurse shifted uncomfortably. "She ran off from the car. I turned around for 1 second and she was gone." She insisted on coming here, said she was meeting someone important. I didn't even know what building she meant. Cassidy didn't say a word. She just held Amos the lion tightly against her chest. The elevator doors slid open on the top floor, and Mabel pushed Cassidy into the wide, elegant hallway where the executive offices were located. The silence here was different, expensive, controlled, the kind of silence that judged you just for breathing. Suddenly, one of the mahogany doors flew open, and a tall man stepped out. He was imposing, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with sharp blue eyes, and a suit that probably cost more than Mabel made in 2 months. His expression shifted the moment he saw Cassidy. "Cassidy!" he barked, striding toward them. The girl flinched, shrinking in her chair. "Where the hell have you been?" the man demanded, his voice tight with fear and anger. Cassidy began, her voice trembling. "She's fine," Mabel cut in, stepping forward. "She was outside, with me." The man's eyes flicked toward her, confused. "Who are you?" "I work here. Cleaning staff," she said, standing tall despite the knot in her stomach. "Cassidy and I talk in the park every morning. She's never been any trouble." He looked back and forth between them, trying to process. "You've been what?" Cassidy's voice broke through the tension. "She was kind to me," she whispered. "She didn't know who I was, and she didn't care. She just sat with me." The man blinked, stunned. His posture softened just slightly. His gaze moved slowly from his daughter to the cleaning woman who stood by her side. He didn't say another word, but something shifted in that hallway. Something quiet and enormous. The following morning, Mabel arrived at work feeling uneasy. The incident from the day before lingered in her mind like a cold draft. She had barely slept, replaying the look on the man's face over and over. The confusion, the alarm, and finally, something unreadable. She hadn't meant to cause trouble. All she'd done was help a lonely little girl. But judging from the man's expression, it seemed like she had stepped into something far more complicated than she realized. As she pushed her mop bucket down the marble hallway, 2 employees whispered as she passed. They didn't greet her. They never had, but this time, they weren't just indifferent. They were watching her, measuring her. One even smirked. By mid-morning, she was called to Human Resources. The office was cold and clinical. A woman in a tight beige blazer with a clipboard in hand and a guarded smile on her face asked Mabel to sit. "We've received some concerns," she began in a rehearsed tone, "regarding your interactions with Mr. Linscott's daughter." Mabel's heart sank. "I never meant anything improper," she said quickly. "I just saw a child alone in the park. I didn't know she was his daughter." "She's a minor, Miss Hart," the woman replied coolly, "and her well-being is a very sensitive matter to this company. Mr. Linscott has a high-profile position, and any contact with his family, especially from staff, raises legal and reputational risks." Mabel's stomach churned. "So I'm being punished for being kind?" The woman didn't answer. She simply folded her hands. "We're not letting you go, but we are advising that you maintain a professional distance from any executive family members, especially during work hours. Do you understand?" Mabel nodded slowly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, I understand." She walked out of the office with trembling hands. The building suddenly felt heavier, like the air itself had turned thick and judgmental. Every corner seemed to watch her. Every glance from a coworker felt sharpened. And when her shift ended, she didn't go to the park. She couldn't bear the thought of facing Cassidy, of having to lie and pretend it was for the best. She imagined the girl sitting there, clutching Amos the lion, looking for her, waiting. Mabel took the long way home that day, her shoulders slumped, her tote bag heavier than usual despite being empty. The streets of Chicago blurred around her, but her mind was fixed on a pair of quiet eyes in a wheelchair under a tree. That evening, in a penthouse suite high above the city, Cassidy sat at the dinner table with her untouched plate. Her father, Carter Linscott, watched her from the opposite end in silence. "You're not eating," he said. "I'm not hungry. You didn't sleep last night." "I was waiting." "For who?" Cassidy looked up at him. Her voice was small but firm. "Not Mabel," Carter blinked. "The cleaning woman?" Cassidy nodded. "She was the only person who treated me like I wasn't broken. Like I was just a girl." There was a pause. "She gave me part of her lunch," she added quietly. "She gave me her son's toy. She gave me 10 minutes every day that didn't feel lonely." Carter leaned back in his chair. He wasn't a cruel man, but he was used to boundaries, to hierarchy. In his world, kindness came with an agenda, and people like Mabel weren't meant to cross invisible lines. But in that moment, something shifted behind his eyes. He reached for his phone and tapped out a message to his assistant. Find me everything you can on Mabel Hart, he typed, quietly. Then he put the phone down and looked back at his daughter, a girl who, for the first time in months, had spoken with warmth in her voice. He had all the power in the world. And for once, he intended to use it for something that truly mattered. The next day unfolded with an eerie stillness. Mabel moved through her cleaning routine mechanically, her hands going through familiar motions, while her thoughts drifted toward the park. She hadn't seen Cassidy since the meeting with HR, and the guilt of that weighed heavier than her mop bucket. Her instincts screamed that she had let the girl down. But something else unnerved her even more: the stares. People were watching her, more than usual. Not just curious glances, but sidelong looks, full of suspicion. Whispers that stopped when she entered a room. Even Darnell, the security guard who usually ignored her, muttered something under his breath as she passed. It wasn't until lunch that she finally understood why. She was in the staff kitchen rinsing out her thermos when two women from marketing walked in behind her. They didn't see her at first. One of them, tall and sharp-faced, said too loudly, "So the janitor's playing babysitter now? With the boss's daughter, no less." The other laughed, but not kindly. "Probably just trying to get a raise. Watch. Next week, she'll be VP of Sympathy." Mabel stood still, her back turned, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles went white. Shame crawled up her spine, burning hot and silent. She left without finishing her lunch, her appetite gone. Later that afternoon, she was cleaning the marble floor in the executive wing when a pair of expensive shoes stopped beside her. She looked up. It was one of the junior partners, a man named Harris, smirking. "I didn't realize they hired emotional support staff along with custodians," he said casually, not even looking her in the eyes. "Be careful, Miss Hart. The higher you reach, the harder you fall." She didn't respond. She just dipped the mop back into the bucket and kept cleaning. When her shift ended, Mabel didn't go home right away. She sat in the darkened janitor's closet for a while, her coat still on, hands in her lap. She thought of Cassidy, her voice, her small smile, the way she held Amos like he was the last good thing in her world. And then she thought of the way everyone looked at her now, like she had dared to exist outside the space she was assigned. She felt foolish, powerless. She didn't even notice the knock at the door. "Mabel?" The voice was low and hesitant. She opened the door slowly. To her astonishment, Carter Linscott stood outside the janitor's closet. He looked nothing like the towering CEO she had faced in the executive hallway. His shoulders were less square now, his expression less rigid. "I was hoping we could talk," he said gently. "Do you have a minute?" Mabel blinked. I was just about to leave." "Then I'll walk with you." They stepped into the hallway together. It was strange. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar law firm and the cleaning woman walking side by side through the silent corridors. "I owe you an apology," Carter said, breaking the silence, "for how things were handled, for letting the office vultures make you feel small." Mabel said nothing. "I read your file," he continued. "I know about your son, about your years here. No complaints, no promotions. No recognition either." "That's not why I'm here," she said quietly. "I'm not looking for recognition." "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." They reached the lobby doors. He turned to her. "My daughter hasn't opened up to anyone since her mother died. I hired therapists, specialists, tutors, nothing. But somehow you reached her. You gave her something no one else could, something real." "I didn't do it for credit," Mabel said. "I'm not offering credit," he replied. "I'm offering trust." He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was an official letter with the Lynn Scott and Reed letterhead, a job offer. Private caregiver and emotional development assistant for Cassidy Linscott, with benefits, triple her current salary, a private office, and complete schedule flexibility. Mabel stared at the paper, her hands trembling. "You want me to be with her? Officially? I want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, but now you'll be respected for it." Mabel looked up at him, and for the first time saw a man who wasn't just a CEO, but a father trying to undo what silence and pride had built around his daughter. "I'll think about it," she whispered. "Please do," he said, before walking out into the twilight. Mabel stood in the lobby long after he'd gone, the letter heavy in her hands, her heart beating louder than it had in years. Mabel didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment. The job offer letter laid out neatly in front of her like a sacred document. The wording was formal, almost cold, but she knew what it meant. It meant trust. It meant value. It meant someone had finally seen her, not as the woman behind a mop, but as someone who mattered. And yet, the decision wasn't easy. She had spent her whole life staying invisible, staying safe, keeping her head down. If she accepted this offer, she would be stepping into the light, into a world of eyes, scrutiny, and expectations far beyond her comfort zone. But then, she remembered Cassidy's face, the quiet way she had looked at her, the way she clutched Amos the lion like he was the only anchor she had left. And Mabel knew, deep in her bones, that it wasn't really a decision at all. The next morning, she walked into Linscott and Reed not with a mop, but with the letter clutched in her purse and resolve in her stride. She was directed to a private lounge on the top floor. There, waiting by the window, was Carter Linscott. He turned as she entered and gave a small, genuine nod. "I hoped you'd come." "I read it," she said, her voice calm but steady. "And I'll do it, but not because it's a promotion. Because Cassidy still needs me." "That's all I could ever ask," he said. They didn't speak much after that. He handed her a new access badge, and she signed a few papers with the company's lawyer. Just like that, everything changed. Her title, her uniform, her position in the world. But in her heart, Mabel remained the same woman. Steady, grounded, and guided by kindness. That afternoon, she stepped into a sunlit room on the 34th floor, Cassidy's private study, with tall windows and a gentle hum of warmth. Cassidy was sitting in her wheelchair, staring out at the skyline. She turned at the sound of the door. When she saw Mabel, she smiled. Not the small, cautious smile of before, but something wide and relieved and real. "You came," Cassidy whispered. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," Mabel said, walking over and kneeling beside her. "And now, I don't have to." Cassidy leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Mabel's neck. It was awkward. The wheelchair made it hard. But it was full of feeling. Mabel held her close, feeling the tremble in the girl's shoulders, and realized just how much weight this child had been carrying alone. In the weeks that followed, the change was remarkable. Cassidy began opening up more. Her laughter came more easily. She agreed to physical therapy sessions without protest, and with Mabel's encouragement, even started asking questions about the world beyond her windows. Books piled on her desk. She asked to go outside again, to feel grass under her fingers. She even let go of Amos the lion once, just to hand it to another child. And Mabel, she flourished too. Gone were the sneers, the whispers. Staff greeted her by name now. Carter would occasionally stop by to check in, bringing coffee and updates. There was mutual respect now, not built on hierarchy, but something more human. Still, Mabel remained humble. She didn't decorate her new office. She still brought homemade sandwiches and wax paper. And every morning, even now that she had a place beside the boss's daughter, she made sure to sit with Cassidy for 10 minutes beneath the tree in the park, just like they used to. It was no longer about roles or titles. It was about the bond between a woman who had lost everything and a child who had nearly given up. And together, they had found something neither of them had dared hope for again: healing. 6 months had passed since Mabel accepted the job, and the world around her looked entirely different. But the change within her, and within Cassidy, was far more profound than any office title or paycheck could reflect. Cassidy had gone from a silent, withdrawn child to a young girl rediscovering the joy of connection. Her physical therapy had become more than routine. It was now a mission. She wanted to walk again. She wanted to stand beside Mabel one day without needing wheels beneath her. She still had a long way to go, but the fire in her spirit was unmistakable. Mabel had become more than just a companion. She was family. Their days followed a rhythm of shared books, park walks, slow but joyful steps in therapy, and quiet evenings filled with soft music and stories about Wyatt. Cassidy had started asking questions about him, about who he was and what he believed in. Mabel would answer through a gentle smile, telling her things she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Somehow, sharing those memories with Cassidy helped ease the ache in her own heart. One evening, Carter Linscott invited Mabel and Cassidy to a small company gala, a formal event full of executives, partners, and shareholders. At first, Mabel resisted. She didn't belong in that kind of room, she told herself. But Cassidy had taken her hand, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "I don't want to go if you're not there." And so Mabel went, wearing a simple blue dress borrowed from a neighbor, her hair pulled back with a silver clip Cassidy had insisted she wear. The event was held in a grand hall lined with chandeliers. When they arrived, every head turned. Cassidy, radiant in a cream-colored dress and polished wheelchair, held her chin high, and by her side stood Mabel, no longer invisible, no longer tucked into shadows. The whispering started almost immediately, but this time it wasn't mocking. People murmured with curiosity, admiration even. Some knew the story, others were just learning. But one by one, people approached, not to judge, but to thank Mabel, to shake her hand, to ask questions about Cassidy's progress. Toward the end of the evening, Carter stepped onto the stage to give his speech. He was eloquent and brief as usual, but at the very end, he surprised everyone. "There's one person I need to acknowledge tonight," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Mabel. "Someone who taught me something I forgot long ago. That kindness, when offered with no agenda, has more power than any law, contract, or dollar sign ever could. That person is Mabel Hart." The room erupted into applause. Mabel froze, stunned. She looked at Cassidy, who nodded proudly, her eyes glistening. And in that moment, Mabel realized she was no longer a ghost in this world. She had become something far more solid, a symbol of grace, a bridge between two broken hearts that had found one another in silence. As the night ended, Carter approached her quietly. "I was wrong about a lot of things," he said, "but not about trusting you." Mabel looked around and at the room, the applause, the little girl who had given her life new purpose, and smiled through tears. "I didn't save her," she said. "She saved me." From that night forward, their lives remained intertwined. Cassidy continued her recovery with Mabel by her side, and together they built a future from the pieces of their pain. Not perfect, but whole, in a way neither of them thought was possible. Because sometimes the smallest act, sharing a meal, offering a coat, sitting in the rain beside someone, can open a door that changes everything. And for Mabel and Cassidy, that door never closed again. As the author of this story, I believe its ending is not just hopeful, it's deeply truthful. Mabel and Cassidy's journey reminds us that healing rarely comes in grand gestures or perfect conditions. It comes quietly, through consistency, through someone showing up when no one else does. Their bond wasn't formed by obligation, blood, or status. It was formed by simple, radical kindness in a world that often forgets the power of it. I wanted to show that even the most invisible person in the room can be the one who saves a life, and that sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. This story is a love letter to unnoticed acts of humanity, to the people who keep showing up with sandwiches and soft words, to the ones who listen, who care without needing a reason, who don't wait for recognition to do what's right. In a society that often values power, wealth, and titles, Mabel's story proves that dignity, compassion, and quiet strength are just as transformative, if not more. The final scene at the gala isn't about validation from the elite. It's about visibility. It's about a woman who spent her life cleaning up after others finally being seen, not as a servant, but as a soul. And a little girl learning to trust again because someone saw her first as a person, not a problem. If even one reader walks away believing that their small, kind actions matter, that they can be someone's Mabel, then this story has done its job.